It's time to do my May wrap-up. But here's the thing. I read so many books in May that I don't necessarily know that I remember how I felt about every single one were it not for my Goodreads reviews, so I may have to just read off my Goodreads. Which means this is going to be a very long video, so strap in. Hello, welcome back to Let Me in the Library. Why do I always forget my own channel name? I made this channel. It's my baby. Why do I forget so much my own baby's name? Welcome back to Let Me in the Library. I'm Rachel, and today I will be doing my May wrap-up, which is cool. This is alcoholic. Let's talk about books. In May, I did too many readathons. I read some books for the Asian Readathon. I read some books for the Zodiac-a-thon. I read some books for the Fantasy Journey-a-thon, which I have a video about. I read for the Bookemon Readathon. I read for the Sea Maiden-a-thon. 2, 3, 4, 5. Wasn't there another readathon? Oh, Bout of Books was the 6th readathon, which I technically didn't really participate in because I kind of forgot it was happening until the last day. So that's my bad. I read not 10, not 20, not 30, but 33 books in May. This sounds great. However, do I remember what happened in every single book and how they all made me feel? We're gonna find out. First book that I read in May was Ouran High School Host Club, Volume 1, which I gave 2 stars. Sorry. I know a lot of people love this series and they love the show and they love the manga, but it doesn't age well, and I never read it when I was younger, so coming into it now, it's not that great. It's pretty tone deaf. It's cute to a degree, but sorry, I didn't really like it. I was doing a buddy read with Lou and Life and Lo-chan Reads, and we're reading the first 5 volumes of Ouran High School Host Club. I gave all of the volumes 2 stars, except for volume 4, which I gave 3 stars because I liked it better. I also read a lot of Agatha Christie books. I know, I can't stop with the mustache. Pretty much all of these were just those really short story books that I think are like 30 minutes or something like that, and I gave all of them 2 stars. Again, I think as an audiobook it is a bit harder to follow the cases, but I did rewind a lot and run through it, and I kind of felt like they were, like the way that they were written didn't really make sense on paper, and if you were to hand it to me as a case study, you probably wouldn't be able to solve it, but it was just like Hercule Poirot just knew something that you as the audience didn't all the time, so that kind of felt cheap for me, and if I can't really follow along in a murder mystery, not because I'm sleepy or I'm bored, but I just don't know what's going on because you're not explaining it well, you're really not going to get more than 2 stars from me. Continuing on, I read Only Human, a great book, except for the parts that were bad. I think I gave this book 3.5 stars. I did a lot of annotations here. And I was also buddy reading this with my boyfriend, as this was the last book in the Themis File series that we were buddy reading all the way together. I got this as an audiobook, and I was listening while I was reading, which was cool. But one of the characters, who in the second book, when she was introduced, had a Puerto Rican accent, suddenly, in this book, had this, like, Brooklyn Jewish accent kind of thing, and she just kept saying, like, an alien curse word, Yokits, all the time, and she was really annoying, and I didn't like her at all. Like, there were things about this book that were cool, but it also really surprised me, because in the last book, it ended at a point where I was like, oh my god, what? And then when I found out that this book takes place 10 years after the events of the second book, I was like, excuse me, no. But it was cool because it was going back and forth between when the last book ended and at this point in time. So I was like, okay, at least we're filling in the lore here. But I also figured if it's going to be 10 years later and they're now on this kind of alien planet, that's what this book would be about. But not really. Like, sometimes, yes, but other times, no. Which I didn't really like, because I wasn't really interested in Earth politics 10 years later in this universe, and some of the things that happened felt like it really cheapened some of the characters and the things that happened. I think the main character throughout the whole series is pretty steadily Rose Franklin, and I still liked her in this book. And I think if it weren't for her, this book would not have done very well. And clearly Rose becomes more heroic and more in charge of her own life and a lot of the decisions that are being made here. But a character that I really, really liked in the first book and in some parts of the second book, he just kept following around that now Jewish Brooklynite person in the book, and it just became so annoying because his whole character centered around her, and because I didn't like her, by extension, I began to not like him anymore either. And some things just felt very lackluster. There were cool things about this book that I don't think are things that have never been done in sci-fi before, so it's not that. But maybe it was just that I don't read all of the hard sci-fi that other people have, so for me, it was interesting to see something like that. However, by the end of the book, I did sort of get the sense that this was being wrapped up really quickly, so some things that happened probably in the last 30 pages of the book didn't quite make sense and felt like it was just too fast of a wrap up, so it felt weaker than the other two books for sure, in my opinion. But I was still really glad I read it, and it was still a fun experience to read. There also is a part where somebody says something in Russian, and I was like, ooh, so I Googled it in Russian, and the Google Translate popped out. Family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten, which I'm sure you know what that's from. That was a cool moment, although then they just told you what it meant, like, on the next page, so I was like, Next up, I read Sitting in the Middle of the Night, which I've already talked about a little bit in my Fantasy Journey-a-thon video, and it was a 1-star read for me. I didn't like it at all. It was a waste of time. Do not read it. It is so bad. You have two main characters, and they each have best friends. And the two main characters are not alike, but they do just face constant beration from their best friends, which sucks. And also, one of the main characters that you follow is going through this very harrowing experience, and you see her best friend just treat her like garbage for the whole book. And you don't understand why she is still trying to be friends with her when your best friend is super emotionally abusive and terrible. And as for the other best friend, I literally don't even know why she was there. She didn't even need to exist. So, and also this was barely sci-fi. This was mainly fantasy. Why were there creatures called crocodiles that aren't crocodiles? They're like octopuses, and you put your head in them, and they give you memories. I don't understand. I didn't like this book. Next up, I read Machines Like Me, which I gave 2 stars, and I also didn't like this book. It was bad. I gave it 2 stars because it did have a slightly philosophical debate in it that I found interesting. The thing is, if you're a male author, and you have to constantly talk about someone's floppy dick all the time and how much sex this person is having, you give me the impression that I should be impressed by this, and I'm not. Kind of gross, and I don't care. I feel like the main character was described as having sex probably 30 times, which really wasn't necessary to the story whatsoever. And also, this book is supposed to take place in an alternate timeline where Alan Turing is still alive because he took special medicine that made the gay go away so he could live on to create really advanced AI, which makes no sense because why did it have to be Alan Turing? And also, the robot man just, like, uploads himself to the computer. So There were dumb things in this book, and they were just dumb. They were frankly just dumb. And I guess this was supposed to be like a big thought experiment, but this could have been written out into like 3 paragraphs or something instead. You decide to write a book about how much sex you've ever had, and you disguise it as something that your main character does. But in a workshop for writing, you overhear this idea of putting your book in an alternate universe, so you want to do that, but you don't really think that hard about it. So you just kind of talk about the Beatles, but with John Lennon still alive, Margaret Thatcher, and not having dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And it's not really tied to your story whatsoever, but you just want to put that stuff in there so nobody else does it before you, and then you throw in a robot that has really advanced AI. So, is it morally just to rewrite Alan Turing's tragic end in real life so that he can be shoehorned into your story in which there are floppy dicks and robots and it has nothing to do with him, and use this to explain his presence by having him drink magic medicine that prays the gay away so he can invent AI, which he didn't do because it could have been any other scientist if you wanted it to be? Why? Up next, I read a book called Range by David Epstein. I gave this 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed this. There were little anecdotes of facing adversity and people coming together to solve problems, and it was really cool that you could do this even though you didn't have experience in the field, and that's kind of what this is all about. It gives this impression that it's actually better to kind of be a jack of all trades because you have more range and actually specializing, not necessarily that it always hurts you, but sometimes you just can't see the problem because you're too close to it. There were some really cool stories about Nintendo and how that started off because there was a guy who was just playing around with cardboard and he made a toy, and then the CEO was like, make more of those. And he did, and he had all of these really cool ideas to innovate and make things better and better and better until eventually Nintendo became this big corporation that it is now for gaming. And it was mainly because he could see things in a different way from other people, and he wasn't, you know, like a video game expert or anything like that. He just could think about things differently. I then read Range, and Range is a comic graphic novel series that follows a couple who have a baby, and they're kind of like fugitives that are running from, I think it's like people just want to like eradicate them because they're different, which is very topical. Range was really good, and I really want to read more of it, and it was something that I like stayed up to read because it was so good, and I think I was like reading it till 2 o'clock in the morning. So I read the first volume, and I am definitely interested in reading more, so that was 4 stars for me. Next up, I read The Ghost Map. The thing is, it was talking about a virus that causes international panic that didn't exist yet at the time that this book was written. And some experts think that a pandemic on the order of 1918 is a near inevitability. But we'll have the tools at our disposal to deal with the emerging threats if we're smart enough to deploy them. But at the same time, it's a whole different animal to have a virus passed from human to human so easily and carelessly compared to the diseases that arose from poor living conditions. Next up, I read the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This is a cool book in some ways, but it definitely had a lot of plot holes that are really hard to avoid acknowledging. First of all, I liked this book. Okay, here's the thing. This is like a domestic thriller that actually doesn't check off all of the boxes of being a typical domestic thriller that you would expect. So you have a protagonist who is not an unreliable narrator. You have a definite bad guy that you just can't excuse the actions of, whereas in a regular domestic thriller, you are constantly gaslit throughout the book that this person is actually not such a bad person. You have this saying that there's nothing nice about Southern women spoken by a Southern woman. That's so great. No one lets out a sound that they didn't know came out of their own mouth, such as screaming so much for very long minutes. there is some like privilege hint dropping and outright mic drop in race distinction, which was very cool to see. There is solidarity amongst women. They're actually not pitted against each other for once. There's a housewife who's happy being a housewife. There are traditional female skills being used in a murder plot. There's a woman that's told to apologize for saying something and she says no and sticks it to the man, which is pretty great. And there's also a villain who literally starts talking about how unique and important they are to the whole world and society and humanity as a whole just for being alive. So, like, you know the bad guy's a man. But there were some things about this book that were hard to get past. There are some trigger warnings that you should probably be aware of going into this book as far as abuse, assault, and suicide. Primarily child suicide, which is pretty hard. I don't like the fact that in some books, you will see somebody get abused or assaulted, and then they're forced to tell everybody about their assault or abuse, which isn't cool. Sometimes you do that stuff to further the plot, but I don't really feel like it was necessary, and in real life, that's incredibly horrible to do to a person, so seeing it in fiction is still really difficult to get by. And even when they did it, someone still responded with, "Don't tell me you believe any of this," so they also didn't believe them, which sucks. And victim blaming is not cool. The villain also insinuates that even if he is killed, another vampire will come out of the person that gets assaulted. So I assume, oh, okay, so his vampire jizz is so strong that we're getting a Renesmee situation. But it turns out that the assaulted person just has an autoimmune disease and that they can't recover from it, and a vampire would like climb out of their skin, which doesn't really make sense, but also that doesn't even happen. So why was this even brought up? I feel like this was something that like was put in there as a future idea, but then they were just like, nah, never mind, and just forgot to take it out. It's not explained how a villain could be in two places at once to assault this woman, but also be with somebody else at the same time. And if you just say that's vampire powers, then okay. But it also is kind of weird to just not really address that even. Like, they didn't even say, legitimately, this is definitely vampire powers. They were just like, yup, it was probably him. Which basically makes this guy invincible in court. Which I guess is why these ladies had to take this into their own hands. Also, the villain discusses with this character about their husband having an affair, and the character says, "I won't do anything yet, this is between us." But then, that evening, that character sees the villain in a very compromising position with a young family member, and the villain says, "This is your fault because you said it was between us." No, that's not what she said. You are just taking words from someone's mouth out of context and applying them to whatever you feel like. So, no? How did you get this from that? They're completely unrelated? What? And for some reason, this family member is basically able to just go to rehab and potentially get a blood transfusion to cure them from what the villain did to them. But none of the other victims could be helped and were driven to suicide. So I don't know. It's just weird also that there would be a string of child suicides and the police are like, I don't know. Well, it's the police, so I don't know. There also is just like a fully supernatural ghost that comes back to life, I guess, because she just must love her son that much that she can defy death and come back. I don't really know how to unpack that, but it doesn't really seem like much of an answer as to why she actually needed to be there, because I feel like the information that she provided for the plot could have been done in a different way that would not require there to be a ghost necessarily, especially being that plenty of people have died and not appeared as ghosts, and I'm sure they loved their kids very much. I don't know. I'm sure they loved people in their lives very much and could have come back if that's all it took, but they didn't. There's also some gaslighting, which is typical of a domestic thriller, and some very unhealthy and unfaithful and or abusive husbands tied to the main characters, and some of them just don't get any consequences for their actions. Like, they lose some money, And I know that's like hit him where it hurts, but I don't feel like that was enough. And the tone generally is still skewed towards middle-class happily ever afters, so I don't think that's asking too much to have given them some more retribution. And I kind of feel like this was sort of supposed to be like a big revenge fantasy, so if we were going for that, we could have just taken it all away, but I don't know. Yeah, but I mean, like, overall, it was still a fun read. I like the southern suburban vibes. It was set in the 90s, so it's like that vibe. And I like the idea of a book club that just kind of reads about serial killers, which was cool. And I liked that it was a domestic thriller that wasn't a textbook domestic thriller, because that is pretty rare to find, in my opinion. You know, there are definitely plot holes that are really hard for me to personally excuse, but I know a lot of people have really enjoyed this book, and I hope if this sounds like something that you would like and you are okay with plot holes and the various trigger warnings that I have given, then give it a shot. Next up is After Me Comes the Flood, and this was a bad book again. Why do men touch young girls' bodies and get to be the good guy? Because you can't do that. It's not cool that in a lot of books that I end up picking up because the premise seems cool, there is always a man that just touches you, right? Like, he just touches some girl, and it's weird, and they don't really address how weird that is. They're just like, but she's young, but it's fine. It's not fine. And also, this was very weird. I felt like this book was written by, I don't know, like maybe somebody could not scroll up on the drafts on their phone or something like that, and it was just written that way, because there were multiple part 1s and part 2s, and it's not explained. And I don't even really understand why the book was written this way, because it wasn't done to drive a point home or be a creative way of writing. It just doesn't serve a purpose. I didn't care about anybody in this story at all, especially the protagonist. He is a boring piece of chalk nothing man that doesn't matter. And it seems like we're going to get some kind of mystery, but instead of holding that suspense, it just kind of like gets dropped on you pretty quickly into the story. So it's this case of mistaken identity, and right away they're like, oh yeah, we know. So it's like, so why was this actually the premise of the book when you read like the dust jacket? If you say this is the premise and then you immediately do that thing, then reading the rest of the book is like, why? Somebody was accused of touching a young boy. That happens, that I guess is supposed to be like the driving force of the rest of the book. Doesn't really speak to any of the horrors of child abuse, really. It's just kind of like something that they go like, sometimes people get accused of pedophilia, so we're just gonna stop you right there and use that for a plot. My own personal preference is, if I'm reading a book and somebody starts singing some dumb jump rope song, or like for no reason in the middle of dinner in a very uncomfortable rendition of For He's a Jolly Good Fellow, I'm checking out, because that shit is annoying. And any book where a man thirsts over a woman that he barely knows, and like, it'll start not mattering to me. Like, I'm not interested in reading about your manic pixie dream girl, who isn't even a manic pixie dream girl, it's just a woman you don't know. Why do men love women that they don't know? Because those women don't know them yet, and they're not repulsed yet? Like, I don't know. Especially if a younger woman comes onto the, like, dull-ass protagonist, why? Why? He's so boring. And then the protagonist is like, guess this is fine. Have morals. And also the ending. I didn't want to go back and reread it, but I did. In case you, as a reader, have started reading this book and you checked out at some point, but you want to know what happened, because I looked online and I couldn't find this anywhere. And the ending just, like, didn't make sense. But here is my reenactment. The weather gets stormy. Everyone, let's freak out, because we've read the Bible and we know what's up. We are scared. The dam that's nearby doesn't break. Everybody, it's probably the dam, even though it's literally just rain outside. Then, this guy who was accused of being a pedophile, who's already shown that he wasn't a pedophile, runs out to the reservoir and he jumps in. Then the main character's crush's boyfriend runs out and jumps in after him and pulls him out. The guy who went in the water, originally, the pedophile, not pedophile guy, has blood coming out of his head. And the sister is like, how will we keep him warm? And the priest character is like,
I will get a blanket.
Then an ambulance appears and everyone's like, nice. Then they're in the hospital and the main character is like, hey, my crush, let me tell you something. She's like, okay. And he says, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm the wrong guy. And she's like, yeah, we went over this in chapter 2. And he's like, oh. And she's like, let me slurp on your tears, though. And he's like, this book met my expectations. And by this I mean, I didn't expect to love it. Almost nothing happened. And nothing made sense. This was so boring. I really wouldn't waste your time. It wasn't clear this is a 1-star book. Up next, I read Notorious RBG, which is about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our favorite. This was cool. This was a little dive into her life and the things that she has had to overcome to reach the position of power that she has now. We have not solved sexism by putting Ruth Bader Ginsburg where she is today, but it is still cool to read about the kind of things that she faced. She had a lot of people telling her no and telling her that she couldn't be who she wanted to be. And even though she graduated at the top of her class, she still wasn't allowed to do everything that men would be allowed to do. It is very nice to see a woman who's made it, and it's inspiring to see the things that she's done. So if you want to be inspired, I would check this out. For me, this was, I think, a 3-star book. This wasn't like life-changing for me because I've already seen some stuff about RBG, so it wasn't like this was incredible to me or anything like that in terms of the writing and whatnot. But it was well researched, and if you've never really heard of Ruth Bader Ginsburg or know why she's important, I would check it out. Okay, so during this month, this is the first 5-star book that I read so far. So I read A Study in Charlotte, and it was very, very good. I really, really liked it. This book was wonderful. I started this a while ago, and then I think I had to return to the library, so I started it all over again, and it was so good. Well, it's like, I'm a fan of the first 2 seasons of Sherlock, and this made me want to watch it again just to get some of that like Sherlock and Watson dynamic back together again. And that one definitely has like those undertones of romance, and this one has some of that too, but I think it's done in a way that's like not a cringy teens in love with each other kind of thing that sometimes you get in YA, but instead you had this like genuinely whip-smart, cool Holmes character and a really endearing, genuine Watson that you enjoy following around, and you can see that the Watson has feelings for this Holmes, but there are definitely things that are preventing them from really being together beyond just a friendship. But they have such an important bond with each other. Okay, let me just talk about what this book is. So this is the first book in a series, and in this world, this is the descendants of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, and what you have now is a Charlotte Holmes who solves cases and a Jamie Watson who wants to be a writer, and they end up at the same school and bump into each other. Everybody knows who they are. Everybody knows about the long history of Holmes and Watsons and also Moriarty's. So it's really cool to see that this is like a young woman who's in the place of a detective. I'll just stop. It was really cool to see a young woman in the place of the detective that knows everything, and a young man who's actually quite a likable character who is following her around. And while there definitely is a sense that there is some romantic tension, it's not like that's the only reason that they're together. And instead, I really like this idea that there is kind of this bond between people that goes a bit beyond friendship, but not quite to romance, and it's just something like you need each other, and you need to have each other in your lives. I don't know, I really love that. I think it's, dare I say romantic? I don't know. And it was really good and I really liked it. It was great. See, I don't just hate everything. That's not true. I think the other thing that's really good about this was it still had the quality of a detective novel, so there are no clues that are hidden from Jamie, who you're following, that, like, there's nothing that Jamie sees that you as a reader don't see. It's definitely addressed in a way that you could kind of solve this alongside the characters. And Jamie also isn't just like a self-insert character. He definitely has his own qualities and characteristics to him as a person that make you care for him, and you don't need to be a self-insert in order to be interested in the events of this book. There were also some really heavy-hitting topics that I really wasn't expecting from a book like this. They weren't just hidden under quirks or unusual personality traits where they could gloss over these big things, but instead they were just addressed very directly. And I really appreciate that. These are all topics that people deal with very differently, so it is cool to see different people in fiction deal with these topics in their own personal way that reflects their character as well. It's not really like the events at the end of the book were so amazing that they wowed me and they really sold me on everything, but I think it was just the general enjoyment of this book that was really, really fun. And it was just so charming and appealing, and you can tell just from me talking about it how much I like this book, so easily, yeah, it's 5 stars for me. I can't wait to see what happens in the next book, which I believe is on its way to me, so I'm really excited to get to that. On to the next book, I read The Boat, which was an adaptation, a graphic adaptation that you can read online. I will leave a link below if you would like to read it. It claims to be a 20-minute reading experience, but for me, I definitely took my time with this, because this is a really cool thing where you can like scroll through, and as you scroll, the things that you see on the page will shift around and change, and you should definitely have the volume up because you'll see things you'll definitely see things on the screen change as you scroll through, and you should definitely have the volume on because you're going to hear like the waves of the boat and the crack of lightning, and ooh, it was really good. And there are also some, I guess, kind of like interactive elements where you can click on something and it'll send you to another page that's relevant, and this definitely was based on real life events, so it definitely gives a lot more heart to what's going on. It was hard to read a little bit by the end. I have a cold heart, and it's not warmed by much, and it's also not affected by too much, I guess. But it was definitely hard to read something that I thought was going to turn into this happy ending, because I'm primed to happy endings, I guess, at this point. So the fact that this ended the way it did, not that it's like a horror, the way that this ended was a shock to me. Next up, I read the series that I really liked. I've only read 3 volumes of it so far. I don't think all of it's out yet. And this series is My Next Life as a Villainess. This is a manga that is about this girl, I think she's like 9. She hits her head and suddenly she remembers her past life where she was a regular girl who would play games online. And one of the games that she played was like a dating sim. And when you play as the dating sim, you're the protagonist and you have different paths that you can pursue to try to end up with different guys. But there's always like the bad person that's trying to like prevent you from finishing these paths because they get in the way, either because they're jealous or they don't want you to be with them or something like that. So there was always this female villainous character who would show up and try to prevent you as a protagonist playing the game from achieving your goals. But if you made the right choices and you got on the good path, then that villainess would either be like exiled from the land or she would be killed. So this girl who hits her head realizes, oh my god, I am currently living in the world where I am that villainess, and I am like living in this video game world. And it's not like something with a lot of zeros and ones where she could go and program anything. It's just that's what the world is that she's living in. And she goes back and figures out like all the people that she's living around. She's like, this is the same name as the guy that's in the game. This is the same place that's in the game. And what? Because she realizes this, then she's like, oh my god, I need to figure out a way that I don't get exiled or killed whenever this main protagonist shows up. I think when she turns 15, then she's gonna enter the academy, which is when the game starts. So during this time from when she's like 9 to 15, she does all these things to try to ensure that she isn't gonna end up down this bad path. And you would think that that means that she's like sabotaging all these different routes, but it's actually very wholesome because she just kind of becomes friends with people. I'm trying to explain. I'm like, I had too much of this daiquiri and I can't remember what I was trying to say. Some of the people that you could pursue in this dating sim have these like dark pasts where they were ignored or they always had a complex. So these were things that evolved in their childhood. So when this main protagonist of the story realizes that she's the villainess, she actually ends up making friends with the people who would otherwise be rivals or love interests. So they all kind of become this big friend group, and it's very wholesome and very cute. And I really love it very much. And it was just so much fun to read something like this. And I feel like it filled my whole heart up. And I haven't read something that made me this happy like this before. Like in this month for sure. It's been a really long time since I've read something and just been like, oh, wholesome. It's so cute. One of my favorite things in fiction or in any kind of writing, my favorite thing is to subvert tropes, which is pretty much at the heart of this series, because this whole idea that she's a bad guy is completely turned on its head as she tries her best to become friends with everybody. And it was so much fun. I read 3 volumes of this, and I gave the first 2 5 stars and the third one 4 stars just because it started going off onto a different path that I'm still okay with. But it wasn't exactly the same mood, happy vibes that I was getting from the first 2. But I still really, really am enjoying it. Definitely looking forward to reading more. Up next was 3 Body Problem, which I read because it was going to expire and I had to hurry up and read it. And it was really good. This was going to be my 5-star prediction for the Fantasy Journey-a-thon. And I think probably some other readathon that I was doing. And I loved it. This was definitely 5 stars for me. And wow, it was so good. Ooh, I feel like this had the aspects of Ender's Game to a certain degree, where you have kind of like a video game where there are definitely there's something going on in this video game that relates to real life. Like in Ender's Game, it was training for a war. And in this, it's not really the same thing at all, but it is some kind of like societal shift, and there were some of those ethical questions that get posed that I really like. And there was this whole thing about like physics doesn't exist that I was like, what have you read a book? What? How does physics not exist? But the way that they explained it was really cool, because there's this idea that we have a sense of physics that we get from experimentation, and we do these experiments over and over again until we say, yep, this is how it is, and we name it a theory, but we really consider it like a law, because it doesn't change no matter how many times we do the experiment on. But this may just be the laws that embody this specific area which we currently live in, and were something bigger to shift, those laws may no longer apply. Or were we to shift to some other location, those laws may no longer apply. So this sense that the science that we know, that a lot of people rely on to do further experiments once they've built this foundation, while this science could exist for now, maybe this is something that doesn't exist in this grand scope of the universe. And that was like, what? Oh, it was very good. My first initial concern of like, science isn't real, what? Was immediately met with this actually very intelligent argument of that, and that's my shit. I really like that so much. Great, 5 stars. Up next, I read The Daughter of the Pirate King, which was the group book for the Sea Maiden-a-thon. Up next, I read The Captain and the Glory, which is a satirical book about Trump. This was a lot of fun. I gave this 3.75 stars. I thought that this was done really well without being like overly gratuitous. I think this didn't overstep into being like too obvious, while obviously still being about Trump, but also if you for some reason didn't know, you would see what a disgrace that this captain is, pretty easily make those connections. And I found myself smiling every single time that I picked this book up, because we've been collectively dumping on Trump ever since 2015, if not earlier, and I feel like this is a good example of comedy in the time of crisis, because sometimes some things happen and it really sucks, but if you find a way to laugh at it and it's not really hurting anybody, it's a good time. Then I read Me, which is a memoir of Elton John. There were some excerpts where Elton John himself spoke, but for the most part this was voiced by Taron Egerton, which you may know played him in the movie. And I feel like this did a pretty good job of explaining some stuff and filling in the gaps that the movie didn't quite put all together for you. And I overall gave this book 4 stars. I don't really have that much else to say about it, but I definitely enjoyed it, and if you're interested in Elton John, I would recommend that you check it out. Also, another manga! This is Case Closed. This is a manga that I love very much, This is a series that follows this young boy, who is actually not a young boy. He is a teenager who gets stuck in the body of a kid because this evil organization made him drink this experimental thing that they thought was going to kill him, but instead it turns him into a kid. And he is already the super genius detective, so he goes around solving crimes, but under the guise of still being a kid. So he ends up doing this through his best friend's father, who is a bumbling detective, and they solve all these cool, interesting crimes. I gave this 5 stars because it's very close to my heart and I love this very much. I don't know if this is something that necessarily everybody would just read and give 5 stars, but for me, revisiting this series during this time was very heartwarming and fun for me, so I definitely really enjoyed it. And if you've never read Case Closed, but you were interested in murder mysteries that can generally be solved around like 3 chapters in, and then start up another one, and you're into like some comedy mixed in the middle, but some like insane cases that you will never be able to guess, I would totally recommend this. Even though before I have said, like, if I can't follow a case, there's no way I'm going to give it more than 2 stars. The thing is with these, it's so much fun while you're following it around, and there's such ridiculous cases that you can't help but smile and enjoy yourself the whole time. So this is kind of the exception to that rule. Lastly, the last book I want to talk about is Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. I've never read this before, but I loved this book. This was fantastic. I didn't think that this book would be so good. This is dumb. I should have known it was good. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of people really like it. And I was kind of afraid that it would disappoint me because I know it's been touted as such a good book, but I really, really liked it. It was so good. Oh, I just couldn't stop thinking about it until I finished it. And wow, it was such a fun time. I really enjoyed it. And it watered my crops. It cleared my skin. I love this book so much. I can't wait to read Sea of Monsters, which I already have out next, and I'm ready to get to it. I'm so excited. So thank you. That is all 33 books that I have read in May. That's so many. This video is very long, so I'm just going to finish it off right there. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please click the description links down there and check out some of those resources that I will have available for you. I will see you in the next video. I don't know how to do an outro anymore. I'm drunk.